Okay, I've drilled out the holes for the mirror backing and for the mirror cell backplate. For the actual mirror backing, I've made the big major holes, which are done using a 44mm diameter hole saw, and I've rebaited the smaller holes that the bolts have to go through with a 16mm flat bit, so that about half of the 12mm ply has been removed, which when you put one of these cup square washers in, called a cup square washer because the head of the bolt looks a bit like a cup, and then you've got the square peg underneath that, and then you've got the bolt, and when that goes into the hole, by rebaiting the hole, it allows the head to completely disappear into the surface so that none of it is showing above the surface. The square part of the bolt cuts into the hole so that when it's fitted into place it doesn't turn, it effectively locks the bolt into place. You then place a washer on top of that, and then you get a nut which screws onto that, and that locks into place. Lock that up with a spanner, and then you have a spring that goes onto there, another washer goes onto the back plate, which I haven't put on now, so you've got a spring, washer on the back plate, that goes through the back like that, and then you have a butterfly nut on the back of that with another washer, and as you alter the position of the nut on the back, the spring pushes the mirror plate in and out relative to the back plate. The next thing that we have to do is, I've taken the discs, the offcuts from these holes, and these are going to be used to make the spider hub and the secondary mirror holder. So what I've done is I've put 4 of these discs together using one of the cup square bolts, and I've put a washer and a nut on the other side and tightened it up. If you then place that into your drill, use a low speed drill setting. Put the drill on a worktop so that the chuck is clear and you're holding it down nice and tight. You get your rasp, and then as you turn the drill slowly, you clean up all of those circles beautifully. And they become the secondary mirror holder. The spider hub consists of 2 pieces of plywood glued together. It has the one bolt going through it, which then goes into the secondary mirror holder below. But in order that it can get a grip, it is fed into one of the discs of the secondary holder, and the others have to be glued onto the first disc. But as you can see, the head of the nut gets in the way. So in the same way as you rebaited the cell holes there, you do the same with the first section of plywood on the secondary holder. When you think you're almost there, you get your bolt, put it through the hole, and make sure that the head is fully recessed, like so. And once you've done that, you can then glue the other 4 pieces onto it. Now we'll look at cutting the 45-degree angle on the secondary mirror holder and the slot for the legs that go through the spider. The first thing to do is to draw 45 degrees onto a piece of paper. Do this by looking down on top of your set square set to 45 degrees. Draw your first line like this. keeping the alignment of the ruler on the line so that they're parallel, take the 45-degree section across, draw your line like so. As you look down on top of this, you line the pencil line up with the edge of the holder, and once you've got it in place, you can clamp it with your fingers like that as hard as you can, so that you can see the other 45-degree line, and then looking directly down on the piece, you cut it with your saw. Secondary mirror holder goes through the hub like that, and the hub is going, or the centre part of the spider, the hub, is going to be supported by two aluminium bars that come out of it in both directions, forming a straight line across it. We've got the 3 screws going to go there, so we want to have the 2 hub lines coming across there. So what I'm going to do is, using the square, I'm going to mark a line across the dead centre in the other direction. Then what you have to do is extend that line across to the other side. And if you look along the edge of it, you can carefully make a little pencil line equating to that corner on the opposite corner. Turn it round, looking down. Do the same on the other side. Extend the pencil marks round to the other surface, and then with your ruler, and averaging between the 2 lines in the very centre of the piece, get it as close as you can. Now in this case we cannot use a clamp, it's not practical because there's nothing to grab hold of, so you just have to very carefully hold it with your fingertips, and you have to just gently rest the knuckles of your fingers against the side of the saw, and very slowly and carefully cut a straight line. Now it's got to be 15mm down. Now it's essential that this is a tight fit to the aluminium bar, so the thing to do is to try it out in the slot. If you find that it's too tight, work with the saw off to the side like that and work your way down. Now we're going to cut the aluminium bar that's going to fit into the middle of the spider hub, and at the moment it's been cut to the distance between opposite corners of the 2 corners adjacent to where the focusing mount's going to go, plus 12mm on each side, and on the telescope that I'm making it works out at about 345mm. It's going to be cut and bent so that when it goes into the slot, it's bent at the very end to go into the hub, so it's housed in a little cutout, and any cutout that you make in timber to house a component, you call that a rebate. So we're going to make small rebates, one on one side and one on the other side. We then cut this using a hacksaw, and the trick is, in this situation, clamp it to the edge of the worktop, and using the small junior hacksaw, you carefully cut across so that it's square. Now what we need to do next is we need to drill 3 holes so that we can bend the strip into the rebate, and we do that with the aid of a 3.2mm drill bit, which is one of the sizes that tends to come as standard. And we start off by putting the drill near the corner, but inside sufficiently that it doesn't jump into the hole, and drill so that you're drilling with a very slight angle away from the hole. And then we'll drill the second hole here. And then work the drill to form a slight notch as you did before. Next thing you have to do is get your bar, put it into the hole, and then you say to yourself, well, actually it's only got to have a very slight, tiny little tongue to go into the rebate that you've made. So what you next have to do is you have to grip the bar in some pliers like so. This is the reason for having 8-inch handled pliers. They give you much more leverage. And then what you have to do is get your flat spanner and put it onto the end like so. Holding it very tightly indeed, you use your flat spanner just to turn the end in, and you only need to go far enough for it to clear that hole. The whole reason for doing this is that when you put the spider eventually into the telescope, it's going to be pulling in that direction and it's going to be pulling in this direction as you tighten the screws up. And by having those two hooks embedded in the hub, it ensures that the aluminium cannot pull out of the central hub. Okay, now the next thing we need to talk about is the size of the drill used to make the holes for the screws. Now this is somewhat more problematic. This is an M3 screw which is going to be used to go through here. Now the problem is you can't just go drilling a 3mm hole because that's exactly the same size as the bolt. And I've drilled several holes in this piece of scrap timber. This is a spare off-cut disc which we're not using. And I've drilled my 3mm hole there, and as you can see, that is not going to screw in. You want to make the hole slightly smaller. So I've got a 2.5mm drill bit, and I've drilled the hole with that. So you want somewhere between 2.5mm and 3mm. Unfortunately, unless you've got an imperial drill bit that's a compromise between those two, there is only one thing for it, and that is open the hole out. Now, the problem with opening a hole out that's only slightly over 2mm is the danger of breaking the drill bit. So the only thing I can suggest you do is, having drilled all the way through, you then want to work the drill putting just the very gentlest of pressure in a 360-degree circle. And you just have to be very slow, careful, and not put too much twist onto it. Having drilled all 3 holes, you then, with each screw in turn, try screwing them in. If you find it's getting too tight, open the hole up a little bit more. Keep doing that until the screw goes in reasonably tight, but not so tight that you can't actually screw it in without risking damaging the head. As long as the screws fall within the washer that will be going onto the top of the secondary holder, as long as the screws fall within that washer, they're not going in so far they're interfering with that bolt, and not going so far out that they're missing the washer. As long as they're somewhere within that washer, even if they are slightly crooked, it doesn't matter. Now then, we've ascertained that these 2 vanes fit properly, and the only other thing that we need to be concerned about is making the holes for the nails to go in. It's very slightly bigger than 1mm, so I'm going to use a 1mm hole to drill this material through in order to support these pins. Before we actually put it in completely, we're going to put a little drop of glue onto this and into the groove, so that as you put the whole assembly together, it's all wonderfully consolidated. Again, put plenty of glue, put your piece in, work it down into the groove like so, and then you finally get your hammer, and you have to hold the piece down carefully, put your pin into the hole, and then gently tap the pin into place. When you get to the aluminium bar, it'll start to get tight. You just have to break your way through. And there you have it. You have 2 pins, the bar's glued into place, and it's a good tight fit. You then repeat the same for the other side. We need to cut the focuser rebate out, and if you remember, we've got the fillet inside the tube here, and the fillet is going to carry the focuser, which is the round tube that comes out, but we need to expose it. Now, there's no easy way to do this. You need to cut a 45-degree hole down into an existing right-angled corner. The only way to really do it is start off with a junior hacksaw, work out where you want to start from first, find the centre line between the fillets, and then say to yourself, well, I'll come in, let's say, 30mm from each side, and then by the time the slope comes down, there's still enough room for the tube of the focuser. You start off by gently cutting into the corner with the hacksaw. So by keeping this blade straight in that direction, and by carefully looking as you cut down, you can start your cut, the first part, up to about 2 centimetres in. Once you've done that, you can go over to using the large handsaw, and you want to do this very slowly and carefully. Follow the bit that you took out with the junior hacksaw. Check by looking on both sides to make sure that the cut is even there and here, and just do it a bit at a time. And as you go along, and that's almost there. I'm not going to quite finish it like that. I'm going to start now by cutting the slot on the other side. Now I shall go back over to the large saw. Now, to remove this piece here, I'm going to use the utility knife. Always make sure that you're cutting in such a way that if you do slip, you're not going to cut yourself. So you start off by working the point into the surface. Don't twist the blade. Now obviously this fillet is like this, so I'm going to make sure that the blade's kept at that angle. And I'm going from the bottom of one of the saw grooves across to the other. I know that neither of them quite touches the fillet, so there's no danger of me accidentally cutting the fillet. Now you see, because that's a brand new blade, that cut that very quickly indeed. Having finished putting the 3.5mm skin on, we're now going to concentrate on putting the 9 on. I made a point of projecting where the baffles are inside the tube onto the outside, so that when we screw the 9mm on, we can screw through the 3mm and into a baffle to give additional support. It helps to strengthen and consolidate the whole tube assembly. So what we do is we get one side of the 9mm and, as best as possible, line it up with the side, so that if anything it's just very slightly overhanging by a fraction of a millimetre, and that's, we can always plane a little bit away or file a little bit away later, but it's very important that you have enough so that when the other piece comes up and butts up to it, that you don't get gaps. So by allowing a little bit, you can offer the next piece up, and if necessary you can trim that to fit. So I've projected the line of the baffle onto this front edge here, and also onto the back edge here. With a 9mm I'm making four holes to put 4 screws in at the top, 4 screws near the bottom here, and then an additional 2 screws at 1/3 intervals on the 2 sides. I'm using the 4mm by 25mm screws to hold this into place. When this is finally screwed into place, it's a simple matter of getting your block plane and shaving away the excess. One final point: in order to facilitate room at the back of the tube assembly for the mirror cell, I'm allowing an overhang of the 9mm in respect to the back of the tube here of 6 centimetres, 60mm. So have the 9mm overhanging the back of the telescope by 60mm, and that obviously applies all the way around. So this is the rebate for the focuser finished. The next thing that we have to do is to drill the hole in, and we need to mark out the centre of the rebate, and you put a little cross in the centre, and the next thing we have to do is to drill a large hole that equates to the same size as the inside 2-inch tube. This is the focuser, and I've made it a composite design because the post-it tubes that you get from Ryman's, like this one here, that's an exact fit for a 2-inch eyepiece, which is very convenient. You make the second piece, which the holder for the main draw tube, out of 2 more of these tubes. You cut them open and then you put little fillets in to spread them out, because obviously it needs to be a larger circumference to accommodate the 2-inch tube. So you cut one, put a fillet in, and then you cut a second one and put another fillet in that one as well, so that you've got a good solid tube with which to hold the eyepiece holder. The hole in the focusing rebate has to be big enough to take this, because when it's fully closed it projects down past the holder. The holder has to be glued onto the surface, and that needs to be able to pass through the hole to inside. With the focusing draw tubes, they're essentially just made out of bits of cardboard, and you roll them around with glue. It's a very mucky job, and you just basically need to have a cloth to hand so that you can wipe the glue off afterwards. And you gradually build up the diameters until one tube fits into the other and it's a nice snug fit. This is an adapter to go from the 2-inch down to 1.25 inch, so that will take a 1.25 inch eyepiece, and that's very simply constructed using cereal packets like that. You glue them up, and what you do is, if you unscrew the sleeving from an eyepiece that fits into the draw tube, you can use that as a gauge when you're gluing together your tubes. So you put it in the end as the glue's beginning to go off. You put it into the end to check it for size. Take it out again, give it a quick wipe, of course, make sure there isn't any glue left on it. So when you know that this is approximately the right size and it's a good sort of tight fit, having applied the glue, you then tape the joint and put it to one side and allow it to dry. When it's dried, you then simply roll more layers on until you build up a good thickness, because obviously you need to have rigidity in the tube. This is so thin and flimsy that by itself it won't suffice, so you have to roll more around with some more glue until you've built up a good thickness. So what I've done is I've taken a post-it tube which I've cut and reduced in the same way as that one there was cut and opened up, and you reduce it to slightly smaller than that hole, and then you can wrap up another piece of cardboard around it and keep building up with thin layers of cardboard and paper until you've got a good fit. So this adapter here is designed to go into there, and it's designed to take the 1 1/4 inch tube, and that means that you have an entire focuser with 1 1/4 and 2 inch eyepieces being able to be used. This particular cutter here is ideal because it's smaller than the holder, so there's still a circumference for the holder to glue on, and it's just big enough to make a hole that the drawer tube can go through. So we start off with a small 3mm pilot hole, and then we shall go over to using the hole saw. This line on the corner equates to the centre line of the chuck, so as you're drilling, keep an eye on that to make sure that you keep your hole square. It's very important that you make sure that this hole is drilled square, because if it's not, the whole of the focusing tube will be off at an angle, and obviously you've only got a certain amount of adjustment in the spider with the secondary flat holder, so do take your time doing this. We're now ready to glue the eyepiece holder into place. Don't forget, when you're gluing, always have your handy wet rag waiting in the wings to wipe any excess glue clear. The first thing you do before you glue it into place is just turn the piece on a piece of sandpaper like so, just to roughen it slightly so that it's ready to take the glue. Put a good amount of glue on, good thick bead all the way around the edge. You can always wipe off the excess afterwards, so don't be scared to use plenty of glue. If there are any little fissures or any little gaps, if you put a good thick bead of glue on, it will make up for any discrepancies in the joint. Look down into the hole to make sure that you've centred the piece. To make sure it doesn't move around after you've put it into place, get yourself some tape, wrap it around one edge, make sure you don't move the holder whilst you're doing this, take it to the opposite corner and wrap it round that as well. Cut yourself a 12mm ring of plywood using your coping saw. Fit it over to check it for fit. There's a little bit of a gap in this one, so I've cut myself a little strip of cereal packet again, and it will just fit into that gap. So, good liberal dose of glue. Then you get your little cardboard fillet. It's gradually moving round, push it in, and then tease it home your thumbnails. And there we are. One holder well and truly secured into place.